My name is Diana Myers. I'm 28 years old. 15 years ago, when I was only 13, my parents legally gave me away. Last week, they walked into my Uncle Harold's while reading wearing confident smiles, escorted by a private attorney, completely certain they were about to inherit millions. They did not walk out smiling. But to understand why my mother turned pale when Clause 7 was read aloud, we have to go back to the summer of 2010. Back to the moment I learned exactly where I stood in my own family. I grew up in a modest house in southeast Portland. It wasn't poverty. It wasn't chaos. From the outside, we looked like a normal, working class family. Inside, love was carefully rationed. My father, Richard, worked as an auto mechanic. Quiet man, the kind who avoided conflict by agreeing with whoever spoke the loudest. That person was always my mother. Sandra. She worked at a grocery store checkout line and ran our household with strict efficiency. Everything had its place. Everyone had their role. My sister Tiffany was 2 years older than me. Blonde hair, blue eyes, quick smile. She looked exactly like our mother, and people said it constantly. Tiffany is your twin. At that age, neighbors would say. Mom would glow. I look like my grandmother. My dad's mother. Brown hair, brown eyes, reserved. No one said that with excitement. They just said it. The differences between Tiffany and me were subtle at first. For Tiffany's 15th birthday, my mom threw a full party. 15 guests, 3-tier custom cake, karaoke machine rental, decorations everywhere. For my 13th birthday 3 months later, it was just the 4 of us around the kitchen table. The cake was discounted, the frosting generic. Happy birthday without a name, a leftover from someone else's cancel order. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself I was imagining the imbalance. Then, when I was 12, I discovered Tiffany had a college savings account. It had been opened when she was 5. 8 years of deposits. Thousands of dollars. I asked my mom why I didn't have one. She didn't even hesitate. Tiffany will need support. You're adaptable. You'll figure something out. That was the moment something shifted inside me. I wasn't the priority. I wasn't even equal. I was the backup plan. In April 2010, I applied, secretly, to the Oregon STEM Summer Academy at Oregon State University, a 6-week residential program for students excelling in math and science. Full scholarship, tuition, housing, materials. Value $42,000. Didn't tell my family. I had learned not to announce hope in that house. On May 15th, I received my acceptance letter. Out of over 2,000 applicants across Oregon, -1 students were selected. I was one of them. For one afternoon, I felt chosen. Then Tiffany mentioned a performing arts camp in California. 3 weeks, no scholarship, $3,800. That night at dinner, my mother presented her decision like she was rearranging groceries. Diana, you'll decline your science program. We can't afford both. Tiffany's camp will strengthen her college applications. My chest tightened. No, I said. The word hung in the air like a gunshot. My mother's voice dropped into the cold register she used on customers who argued about expired coupons. If you can't make sacrifices for this family, she said slowly, then you're not part of this family. I thought she was speaking emotionally. I didn't realize she was speaking literally. 3 days later, I came home from the library to find my belongings stuffed into 2 black garbage bags sitting on the porch. My mother stood in the doorway. I called Harold. She said calmly, he's coming to get you. My father stood behind her in the hallway, silent, avoiding my eyes. Upstairs, behind the curtain, I saw Tiffany watching. No one came outside. I sat on that porch from 6 in the evening until 10 at night. 4 hours. No porch light. No goodbye. When Uncle Harold's car finally pulled into the driveway, I was still sitting on those garbage bags. He didn't ask questions. He didn't hesitate. He just hugged me. From now on, he said quietly, you have a home. I didn't know that while I waited in the dark. My parents were inside signing legal paperwork. I didn't know they weren't just throwing me out. They were signing away their rights to me. I was 13 years old. It would take 15 years for that document to resurface. And when it did, it would dismantle everything my mother believed she was entitled to. But that wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning. Because what happened after Uncle Harold took me in changed my life in ways my parents never saw coming. Uncle Harold's house in Seattle wasn't large or extravagant, but to a 13-year-old girl who had just been discarded in garbage bags, it felt like safety. Ballard was quieter than Portland, cleaner. The air even smelled different, salt from the sound drifting in from the water. His home had creaky wood floors, a small backyard, and a spare bedroom that he cleared out in a single night so I wouldn't have to sleep on the couch. For the first time in my life, I had a room that was mine. But what changed everything wasn't the room. It was him. Harold didn't ask what I had done wrong. He didn't demand gratitude. He didn't treat me like a burden he had inherited. He treated me like I belonged there. And that difference rewired something inside me. Harold had built his company, Myers Property Holdings, from nothing. He started with one modest commercial building he purchased after years of double shifts and careful saving. By 2010, he owned 8 properties across the Seattle metro area. He had never married, never had children. Until, in every way that mattered, he chose me. He didn't just provide food and shelter. He invested in my future. He helped me enroll in a new school. He met my teachers. He attended math competitions. He sat in the front row at every ceremony, clapping louder than anyone else. I poured myself into school like it was oxygen. By 2014, I graduated from Ballard High School as valedictorian, 4.0 GPA, math club president, full academic scholarship offers. Harold cried at graduation. I pretended not to notice. The University of Washington accepted me into the Foster School of Business. I chose finance. Numbers made sense to me. They followed rules. They rewarded effort. Unlike people, starting sophomore year, Harold brought me into his company during summers and breaks. I learned everything from the ground up. Data entry, lease agreements, tenant disputes, property evaluations. No shortcuts. If you're going to lead, he once told me, you need to understand every level of what you're leading. After graduating in 2018 with honors, I joined a major accounting firm in Seattle to earn experience outside the family business. I passed my CPA exams. I worked brutal hours. I built credibility that had nothing to do with my last name. In 2020, Harold offered me the controller position at Myers Property Holdings. In 2021, I became CFO. By the time I turned 26, the company's portfolio had grown significantly. Under my leadership, we increased occupancy rates, stabilized underperforming properties, and expanded into new developments. Harold sent me an email on my birthday that year. Subject line, to my daughter. He had legally adopted me in 2012 when I was 15. I hadn't fully grasped the significance at the time. To me, he had already been my father long before paperwork caught up. The email read, you never needed rescuing. You needed opportunity. I'm proud of the woman you've become. I kept that email. I still have it. Meanwhile, my biological family reached out exactly 3 times in 15 years. The first time was in 2012. My mother called Harold, not me, asking for money. My father had lost his job. They needed $5,000. They didn't ask how I was doing. Harold declined. The second time was a wedding invitation from Tiffany in 2016. No handwritten note, no explanation, just a printed card mailed to Harold's address. I didn't attend. The third contact came in 2020. An email from my mother after she saw a business article about our company expanding. She wrote that she hoped we could catch up. I deleted it, not out of anger. Out of clarity. I had built a life that didn't include them. In summer 2024, everything shifted again. Harold was diagnosed with advanced congestive heart failure. The prognosis was 12 to 18 months. He lasted 8. During those months, he met repeatedly with his estate attorney, Margaret Morrison. He updated documents, revised details, made preparations. When I asked about it, He smiled. It's handled, he said. Focus on living. I didn't know the specifics of what he'd written. I didn't know he had anticipated a challenge. I didn't know he had planned for confrontation. Harold passed peacefully on February 28, 2025. I was holding his hand when it happened. 1 week later, my phone rang. Unknown Portland number. I answered. Diana, my mother's voice said, careful, measured, like she was stepping into cold water. She expressed condolences. Then, almost seamlessly, mentioned the will reading. She and my father intended to attend. They had hired an attorney. They were immediate family. After all, that was the moment I understood. They weren't coming to mourn. They were coming to collect. The next morning, Margaret Morrison confirmed my suspicion. My parents had formally filed a challenge to the will grounds. Undue influence. They were claiming I had manipulated a sick man into rewriting his estate plan in my favor. They demanded half of the estate. Not because they had been present in his life, not because they had supported him, because they believed blood entitled them to profit. Margaret laid out the reality clearly. If this goes into litigation, she explained, the estate could be tied up for a year or more. Legal fees alone could cost hundreds of thousands. In other words, they were betting I would pay them to go away. A settlement would be simpler, cleaner, less public. Then Margaret retrieved a file from the archives, a yellow document from 2010. Did you know about this? She asked. It was a voluntary relinquishment of parental rights. Signed. NOTARIZED. Filed. My parents hadn't just thrown me out. They had legally severed their connection to me. Margaret looked up. As far as the law is concerned, they stopped being your parents 15 years ago. The room felt very small. And suddenly, I understood something else. Harold had known they might come. He had planned accordingly. Margaret gave me two options. Settle quietly, or proceed with the will reading and let everything be revealed publicly. I went home that night and sat in silence. Photos of Harold and me lined the mantle. Graduations, certifications, promotions, 15 years of chosen family. By morning, I had my answer. No settlement. No silence. If they wanted to sit in that room, they would hear the truth read aloud, and they would hear it in front of witnesses. The will reading was scheduled for March 14th. 5 days away, they were walking into that room expecting millions. They had no idea what Clause 7 contained, and neither did I. But Harold did, and he had written it for a reason. And what happened in that conference room would change all of us forever. March 14th arrived gray and heavy, the kind of Seattle afternoon where the sky feels close enough to press down on your shoulders. The will reading was scheduled for 2 p.m. at Margaret Morrison's office on the 47th floor of Columbia Center. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Elliott Bay, but the clouds swallowed most of the view that day. I arrived 15 minutes early, navy suit, hair pulled back. No jewelry except a simple watch Harold had given me when I became CFO. I didn't want to look emotional. I wanted to look immovable. Inside the conference room, representatives from Harold's longtime charities were already seated, to senior staff members from Myers Property Holdings, the company's auditor, Margaret and her associates, neutral witnesses. Harold had always been deliberate. At 2:03 p.m., the elevator doors opened. My mother stepped out first. Black dress, pearls, carefully applied makeup. She carried herself like someone attending a high-profile event, not a will reading. Behind her came my father, slightly hunched, sitting tight at the buttons. Tiffany followed, pale pink dress, eyes darting nervously. And finally, their attorney, Victor Harrington, polished, expensive, carrying a leather briefcase that looked like it cost more than my first apartment. My mother scanned the room. When she saw me seated at the center table, something flickered across her face. Not grief, calculation. I'd like to speak privately before this begins, she said smoothly. We'll begin shortly, Margaret replied before I could answer. Seats for non-beneficiaries are along the wall. The word non-beneficiaries landed like a quiet warning. My mother's jaw tightened. She took her seat anyway. Not quietly, making sure to introduce herself loudly to anyone who would listen. We were very close to Harold, she said to a hospital representative. It's unfortunate how misunderstandings can divide families. I didn't respond. At exactly to 10 p.m. Margaret broke the seal on the envelope. This is the last will and testament of Harold Raymond Myers. The formalities passed first. Identity, capacity. A recent psychiatric evaluation confirming he was of sound mind. When signing, I noticed Victor shift slightly in his chair. They had likely hoped to question Harold's mental state. Margaret moved to the inventory of assets, 12 commercial properties. Invest, and for the first time, I realized something powerful. Reconciliation is optional. Boundaries are not cruelty, they are clarity. 1 year after the will reading, I stood outside Harold's first commercial property. A bronze plaque had been installed by the entrance. Harold R. Myers, a man who chose love over blood. I ran my fingers across the engraved letters. The business had grown steadily. Portfolio value increased. Occupancy rates remained high. The Myers STEM Scholarship have funded its first 5 students, all from complicated family backgrounds. I watched them present their summer research projects. A few weeks later, I saw myself in them. The quiet kid who just needed one person to believe in her. Tiffany and I still spoke monthly. We weren't close in the traditional sense, but we were something. Careful. Honest. Evolving. My parents had stopped trying to reach me. And I no longer wondered what they were doing. Closure doesn't require confrontation. It requires acceptance. Here's what I learned. Your worth is not conditional on who claims you. Family is not. DNA. That's consistency. It's protection. It's showing up. Harold didn't rescue me. He gave me space to grow. And that changed everything. If you've ever had to set boundaries with someone who insists they're entitled to you, remember this. Forgiveness is for your peace. Reconciliation is your choice. They are not the same thing. And choosing yourself is not selfish. It's survival. But there's one more part of this story I haven't told you yet, because what happened 2 years later forced me to face a question I never expected. What do you do when someone who hurt you genuinely changes? And how do you know if it's real? 2 years passed. Not dramatically, not explosively, just quietly. The kind of quiet that only comes after chaos has burned itself out. The business continued to grow. We expanded into mixed-use developments. The STEM Scholarship doubled its funding after several private donors, inspired by Harold's story, contributed. I found myself speaking occasionally at youth mentorship events, something I never would have imagined doing at 13. Tiffany and I maintained our monthly calls. They stretched from 15 minutes to half an hour. Sometimes we talked about her kids' school projects. Sometimes about work frustrations, sometimes about nothing at all. It wasn't effortless, but it was honest. And that mattered. Then, one afternoon in late autumn, I received another letter. Not an email, a physical letter. From my mother. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. Inside, the handwriting was uneven, not dramatic, not theatrical, just older. This letter was different. No references to blood. No insistence that she was still my mother. No vague apologies wrapped in excuses. Instead, it was specific. She wrote about the night she packed my things. She admitted she felt threatened by how different I was. She admitted she favored Tiffany. She admitted she chose control over compassion. She admitted signing the guardianship papers felt easier than admitting she was wrong. There was no request at the end. No, can we talk? No, I deserve a chance. Only this. I don't expect forgiveness. I only want you to know that I see it clearly now. I failed you. I read it twice. Then I sat with it, because here was the question I never thought I would face. What do you do when accountability arrives too late to undo damage, but early enough to still matter? I brought the letter to Dr. Hayes. She didn't ask for anything. I said, "That's new." Dr. Hayes replied, "It is. And what do you want?" That question again. Always came back to that. Not what would look generous, not what would appear healed. What did I want? The truth was complicated. I didn't crave reconciliation, but I also didn't feel anger anymore. The absence of anger is strange. It doesn't feel like warmth. It feels like neutrality. Like standing on level ground. After a week, I wrote back 5 sentences. I acknowledged her letter. I said I appreciated the specificity. I said I had built a full life. I said I didn't wish to reopen a relationship, and I wished her well. That was it. No invitation. No door left crack open. Just closure. She never wrote again. Sometimes people assume stories like mine need dramatic redemption arcs. Tears. Reunions. Public apologies. But real life isn't cinematic. Sometimes growth means accepting that someone changed and still choosing distance. Because boundaries aren't punishments, they're protections. And I had worked too hard to build peace to gamble it for nostalgia. On the 3rd anniversary of the will reading, I visited Harold's plaque again. The sky was clear, unusually bright for Seattle. I stood there, thinking about 13-year-old me, sitting on a dark porch. Waiting, believing she must have done something terrible to deserve abandonment. If I could speak to her now, I would say this: you weren't too much, you weren't not enough, you were simply in the wrong environment. And one day, you'll choose a better one. I didn't become successful because my parents rejected me. I became successful because someone else chose me. There's a difference. Pain can push you forward, but love sustains you once you get there. Tiffany and I still talk. Her kids call me Diana, not Aunt, and that's fine. Relationships don't need traditional labels to have value. The scholarship program now supports 12 students a year. Every time I meet one of them, I see that same quiet determination I once carried. And I remember Harold's words: you didn't need saving, you needed space. That's what I try to offer now. Space. Opportunity. Belief. If you take anything from my story, let it be this: your worth is not determined by who rejects you. Family is demonstrated, not declared. Forgiveness is internal. Access is external, and you are allowed to choose who has it. The will reading wasn't the moment I won. The moment I won was the night I realized I no longer needed their validation. Everything else was just paperwork, catching up to reality. And if you've ever been the child who felt invisible, overlooked, or discarded, I hope you understand this. You are not spare. You are not secondary. You are not optional. You are someone's future legacy, maybe even your own. And sometimes, the most powerful inheritance isn't money. It's the freedom to decide who gets to stay in your story. If this journey resonated with you, if you've ever had to draw a line and hold it, remember, choosing peace is not weakness. It's power. Asterisk. There's something no one tells you about closure. It doesn't arrive like fireworks. It arrives like a habit. Quiet, repetitive, ordinary. It's the absence of flinching when a memory surfaces. It's the ability to say someone's name without feeling your pulse spike. It's noticing that you no longer rehearse arguments in your head before bed. That's how I knew I was truly free. Not after the will reading, not after the legal complaint, not even after the letters, but on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon when I realized I hadn't thought about my mother in weeks. That was new. 3 years after Harold's passing, Myers Property Holdings expanded beyond Washington. We acquire our first property in Oregon. Portland. The city I once left in the backseat of Harold's car at 13. When the acquisition finalized, Ellen asked carefully, "Are you okay doing business there?" I surprised myself by answering honestly, "Yes." I said, "It's just geography now." We renovated the building into mixed-income office spaces, small business leases, flexible contracts, accessible rates for startups that wouldn't qualify for traditional financing. On opening day, a local news outlet requested a short interview. They asked what motivated the expansion. I didn't mention inheritance. I didn't mention legal battles. I said this: opportunity changed my life. We want to create environments where people who feel overlooked still have a place to grow. That was the truth. The STEM scholarship continued expanding. One afternoon, I met a 15-year-old girl named Aurea. Quiet, brilliant, guarded. Her application essay described feeling unnecessary in her own household. When she spoke about robotics, her entire face transformed. I recognized that look. After the event, she lingered. "Do you really think I can do this?" she asked. I didn't give her a motivational speech. I didn't promise success. I simply said, yes, and even if it takes longer than you expect, you still belong in the room. I think that's what Harold gave me. Not guarantees. Belonging. Tiffany single quotes S. Children are older now. Jaden sends me photos of his science fair projects. Lily once mailed me a drawing labeled Diana's building after visiting Seattle. Tiffany and I no longer set timers on our calls, but we still move slowly. Trust built over decades of absence grows differently than childhood bonds, and that's okay. Healing doesn't have to look traditional to be real. As for my parents, I heard through extended relatives that they downsized, that retirement hasn't been easy, that life feels smaller than it once did. I didn't reach out, not out of bitterness, but because my boundary wasn't reactive. It was intentional. And intention doesn't waver with gossip. I sometimes wonder if my mother rereads the letter she sent me. If she thinks about that porch. If she understands that the most expensive thing she lost wasn't the inheritance. It was access to watch who I became. But that's not my burden to carry. On the 5th anniversary of Harold's passing, I visited his grave early in the morning. No ceremony. No audience. Just me. I brought fresh flowers and a printed report showing their scholarship's 5-year impact. Summary. Total students funded, 41, graduated college, 12 so far, STEM internships secured, 18, ongoing mentorship placements, 27. I placed the report under the flowers. Still building, I said softly. The wind moved gently through the trees. I used to believe legacy meant money. Assets. Buildings with your name engraved in metal. But legacy is actually repetition. It's values that continue after you stop speaking. Asterisk. It's the way someone else makes decisions because of what you taught them. Harold didn't just leave me property. He left me perspective, and that's harder to quantify. If I could summarize everything that happened, the abandonment, the adoption, the will reading, the confrontation, the letters, it would come down to this. You cannot control who chooses you at the beginning of your life, but you can absolutely control who has access to the rest of it. The greatest shift in my story wasn't when my parents lost their claim. It was when I stopped needing them to want me. That's when power returned, not loudly, not dramatically. But permanently. So, if you're listening to this and you've ever felt like the spare child, the overlooked sibling, the inconvenient one, I promise you this. Rejection is information. It tells you where you don't belong. It does not determine where you do. Some people inherit money, some inherit land, some inherit trauma, but the rarest inheritance of all is the ability to choose differently than the people who raised you. And that choice, that's the real fortune. Now, here's the question I want you to sit with. If you stop chasing approval tomorrow, what could you start building instead? Because your story isn't defined by who left. It's defined by what you build after they do. Asterisk. And trust me,